So, hi everyone, and welcome to this 16th Urban AI conversation. My name is Hubert, and I'm the founder of Urban AI. So, what is Urban AI? It's a think tank dedicated to the emerging field of urban artificial intelligence. We are also a community, an international community that is doing research, experiments on Urban AI, and we are also regularly organizing events such as this one to better understand what is urban artificial intelligence and the challenges, risks around this technology. Today, for this 16th Urban AI conversation, we have the great pleasure to welcome three Urban AI members, actually. Karla Saldana Ochoa, who is leader researcher at Share Lab and assistant professor in the School of Architecture at the University of Florida. Laura Narvaez Zertuche, who is associate partner at, again, congratulations for this new role at Poster and Partners and visiting lecturer at ETH Zürich, and Tabea Sonnenschein, who is a PhD student in urban simulation and public health at Utrecht University. So what's the program of this Urban AI conversation? First, we will have a 30-minute conversation moderated by Tabea on the following topic, generative AI and urban design. And then we will have a kind of open discussion, Q&A session with all of you. So if you have questions in mind, feel free to use the chat to ask them, or you can wait for the Q&A session and directly ask your questions to our panels. Karla, Laura, and Tabea, the floor is all yours.
Okay, yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Hubert, for the introduction. And yes, I want to just make sure that the topic is a little bit more clear of today, because of course, with regards to generative AI, there are so many salient discussion points right now around like alignment problem or governance of these technologies, the future they will bring, etc. And you've probably noticed that these discussions are already taking place in a lot of places. So I think today we can really zoom in to a more specific question that is about how generative AI is influencing the sector of architecture and urban design. And I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. So maybe to start, I would like to ask you, Karla, because you also wrote this article, Can AI Mark the Next Architectural Revolution, which was really interesting and comprehensive. I want to ask you, first of all, could you help us define generative AI, how is it different from other forms of AI, and also why are you interested in how it influences architecture and urban design?
Yeah, thank you, Tabea. I think I always start referring to what AI means. So within AI, there are different other types of research areas. So for example, AI can be logic-based, but it can also be machine learning, and it can also be deep learning. So not all of these are the same. They are just part of the great umbrella term that is AI. On generative algorithms are a very particular class of AI algorithms. If we compare to one algorithm that we know very well, which are the classifiers, which are these discriminative algorithms that are able to create classes based on the data that they are learning from, generative algorithms don't specify classes, but they learn what the class is. So they create kind of a blueprint of the data that they are looking at. So instead of giving you like a classifier will give you probability of being class 1 or class 2, a generative algorithm interpolates between what class 1 means. So it creates an understanding of what the class is instead of giving you the data directly. So it is generating by interpolating data points.
Yeah. And Laura, would you agree with that definition, and why would you be, or why are you interested in how it influences architecture and urban design specifically?
Well, I mean, yes, I would agree with what Karla just defined. I mean, at the heart of it, we need to understand first what artificial intelligence means, which is pretty much what Karla just defined. And yes, machine learning is a type of AI. So through machine learning, practitioners develop AI through models that can learn from data patterns without the human direction. Although there's a whole conversation perhaps that we take into the human in the loop discussion. But I think from my perspective, it's also understanding AI when it comes to generative design. So Karla described the AI and what is actually generative design before AI, let's say. And generative design is something that is scalable, something that is flexible. That's a framework, and it can be applied to a wide range of design problems and scales. So I think it's also that understanding that it needs the digital computation and the human creativity to achieve results that otherwise cannot be possible. And I think it involves the integration of rules-based geometrical systems, a series of metrics, goals, and the system to automatically generate and evaluate. And I think this is where the AI part of those solutions comes into place. So that's where I place my interest from an urban design point of view. In the sort of how do you generate the sort of solutions involving different stakeholders that are embedded into that process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Very interesting. So of course, like the general public has been in the last half year, like exposed to this huge amount of new tools, like first the image generators like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, etc. And then suddenly ChatGPT 3 and 4, and now there's a discussion of 5. So I'm just wondering, maybe one of you could help us understand by giving an example of how would you use those generative AI tools in the context of like an urban designer job, what tools would you use, how exactly, so that we could maybe understand a bit better.
I can jump in just to complement what Laura said and to continue the discussion about what generative AI is first, because we are seeing now these algorithms that are learning from data, that are interpolating between these data points and generating new, or let's say, what we consider new options. But generative AI can also be rule-based. So we have a lot of algorithms that are parametric algorithms that are generating new things through parameters, and as well as logic-based algorithms that you are the one who define how it should create the new form. So I think at the moment in urban design and in architecture, we should leverage the already created knowledge through this parametric design and through these logic-based generative algorithms, and also gain the advantage from data itself. Because what Laura was saying is that currently, DALL-E, ChatGPT, they are learning from the web. They're learning from already curated data sets and from pictures that we're taking from our phones. But in urban design and architecture, we don't only work with images, we work with more layers of complexity. We work with 3D objects. We work with objects that have different layers, such as structural stability, such as comfort, such as energy efficiency. So how do we leverage this image-based generation through this parametric 3D model generation as well? So I think this is how I use it in my work. I try to use generative AI as a way of giving me ideas, or as a way of pointing towards somewhere, but I am the designer, the human in the loop, as Laura said, that is able to make the decisions. And how I have a particular project that we are developing a generative algorithm that you input text and it outputs a 3D structural stable form, which means that we are leveraging these parametric designs, the parametric algorithms that allow me to have a structure, a form that is structurally stable, but still the playfulness that AI gives you by learning from data. So that's how I will use it, or I'm using it.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I saw it also. I think there's more information on it in your article as well. Very interesting. And actually, it kind of leads already to another question that I had, which is that if you think about just using textual prompts in image generators, yeah, you could think that, yeah, using it in the world of urban planning or architecture would be dangerous because it's reductionist. It doesn't consider the whole socio-geographic context of where you want to make a place, like placemaking, etc. And yeah, can you maybe elaborate a little bit more how exactly you could use, like which type of content can you use, reuse, and how you can then interact with generative AI to actually like enhance your understanding of a place, and yeah, also address this issue that it could be like reductionist.
So, sorry, let me see if I understood your question. You're saying that it doesn't, you mentioned that it doesn't consider the place in context, or what did?
Yeah, if you just ask, for example, an image generator to create a specific aesthetic in a building or something, then you're completely ignoring the place and the purpose and etc. of where you want to make.
Yeah, but I think again, in my experience and in what we do in the practice, and I'm not going to speak solely for myself. This is a practice that is very collaborative. So there are other people that work in this field. So it's a collaboration that we do take into consideration the context. We have to within our process. So I don't think we should reduce it only on the use of the of a generative model, or you know, in terms of, you know, how the AI works, the generative AI model works, because there are other factors that also influence that. So for example, Karla was mentioning, you know, you use the imagery. As an architectural practice, we use a lot of imagery, right? But you know, there's a full discussion whether you can use things like Midjourney, for instance, which can literally replicate whatever you tell them into what we spent hours producing in a design project and a render image, which is, you know, and that's actually quite impressive to also see about. But there are other issues of, you know, about copywriting that, you know, you shouldn't be actually doing that in practice. But regardless of that, I think that the use of any generative AI model is just part of the process, right? To understand different layers within, at least in the understanding of cities. There's the use of, we use a lot of the virtual reality and augmented reality that can create the sort of engaging experiences when we try to experiment urban designs in a virtual setting. So that's just one part of it. And that is more within the design process on how we can shift things rather than as a, you know, here it is and, you know, it's beautiful. The other, there's always a conversation of the digital twins and how they can be useful to simulate and test urban designs and to monitor performance or optimizing operations. So that use of generative AI technology as practitioners or as an urban designer, that can, you know, it helps us to optimize a little bit better, you know, our sort of process and our sort of thinking of a particular project within a particular context, within a particular, you know, challenges and solutions for a project, right? So and there's also other ways that, at least from urban design, we use a lot, and is the analysis of data from urban environments that use predictive analytics that can reveal certain patterns and, you know, provide future trends forecast. So that's a different also way to do it. And so how can we analyze information obtained from sources like, you know, either OSM, which is a more GIS based, or, you know, in some other practices, they use the data from sensors or cameras in order to have a more well-informed decision making in the design process. So predictive analytics there's different applications to it. So I just think that in my view, there is the part of the technology, but also within the process, there's always the other factors that interrelate into it. So I wouldn't just, you know, summarize it into the actual model itself, if you know. So.
Yeah, I wanna complement this. You brought, Laura, a very interesting topic, which means the design process, right? The design process has different stages, And we cannot compress everything to say a design process can only use this one algorithm, and how do I use this to the final outcome. So when you, Tabea, are talking about how do we bring the community engagement, the user needs into design process and how to use AI, I will say generative AI is not the answer. It's not the right architecture for this community engagement inclusion. So one way that I use this is through what Laura said, this predictive analytics of social media data. So you're able to use feature vectors to extract features from data that you have collected. And through, I use unsupervised learning algorithms such as self-organizing maps. These algorithms help or are used as search engines. So instead of using a search engine that is built for everyone, a generalized search engine, you're able to create personalized search engines to understand the place, to understand the users, only because you were able to reduce the complexity of space through AI algorithms. So for example, I say generative AI now, it's an interesting application of AI. So as any other that they are. So classifiers are very helpful when you're trying to understand the classes within the population. Predictor algorithms are helpful to understand whether you're looking for, whether you're trying to infer something into a database. But generative AI, I think it's helpful to get you an understanding of what are the possible opportunities within a design question. So what I will say, another question that may be interesting to talk about is with generative AI, you end up having millions of solutions, right? You have the potential to have all of them. Or let's say like limited, yes, but a lot. How do you actually arrive to the decision or the solution of the thing that you're looking for? And I think this is when it comes again, these other types of AI, such as search engines that you can personalize based on what you're looking for. So I think generative AI needs to be complemented with these other research areas that have been already developed in previous years and should not be considered as the only solution for design strategies or design any stage of design process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's part of the process, really. I see it more as a process rather than the end solution in a way. So yeah, absolutely. Agree.
Yeah, super interesting and fascinating. And you touched upon a lot of other topics that I think could be interesting to dive into, from, first of all, the authorship thing, but also something that you just mentioned is that, yeah, you can use it to search and get a larger breadth of ideas for your design process. So I think that touches upon the whole topic of creativity, which I think is interesting because there's been some like general criticism or fear that this tools, which on their own seem to be so creative already, like there's already whole movies written by AI, there's paintings and whatever made by AI. So the question is, yeah, the way that you described it, right? It seemed that you can actually use it to be more creative by thinking of more options. So my question is, how do you just define like creativity in the process of urban design, and how do these generative AI tools influence that? Does it actually threaten our creativity? Because there's certain things like standardization, for example, yeah, because these algorithms, they interpolate, right? They could take the aesthetics of the majority of content, and then you basically have some sort of a standardization process. Then and apart from that, you have automation. So for example, I'm working in the field of science, and we're afraid of students using ChatGPT to write their essays. So instead of coming up with ideas on their own and with argumentation structure. So how do you think that is playing out in the field of architecture and urban design? Like how does it link to human creativity?
I want to do an exercise of thinking right now. So there was this very nice quote by Einstein that says, knowledge is limited, but imagination is not. So we need to think about how to empower imagination, which I think is creativity. And I think what AI or these large language models are right now are this knowledge, which I think are limited. So if you think about, for example, in mathematics, you always need to define axioms, and then you can start finding proofs. I think AI, it's good to finding proofs, but humans are good to defining axioms. And if you take it to another level, I think imagination is what makes us humans. And then discovery is what we can do with AI. So creativity, and I just like summarize all of these 4 words that I said. Creativity is about imagination that is unlimited, that it's portrayed by human intelligence. And then AI, it's a tool that you use, a tool or an instrument that you use to discover things that have already been created through our imagination. So we are the ones that describe the axioms of what we're living, the world that we're living. I think if you take these more precisely, right? So how do you make the difference between imagining and discovery? I think that will, like, even in the dictionary, you will see how it pertains to human and to machine. So, for example, one of the research areas in my lab is how do we use AI to empower creativity? How do we think of it as an instrument that helps us be more creative? So I have this analogy that says, okay, AI, it's very good to be used as a tool, such as a hammer or a lever, because AI, it's good to solve a particular problem, right? So we can use it to solve that question, that problem we have. But how do we use it as an instrument? An instrument similar to a violin, similar to a piece of paper, to a computer, that it only can articulate a masterful piece through a masterful human. So let's think about AI as being this instrument that allows us to be more creative, to arrive to the place we want to be, but not rely only on using it to solve this particular problem.
So I'll add that beautiful meaning to Karla, 2 words that complement. It is about imagination, but for me, it's about collaboration. You also tend to have the more creative thinking when you have someone outside of the box, perhaps, or the share of knowledge. The sharing of knowledge, I think it's rather important for me, besides the imagination, obviously, and besides that sort of, capacity that you have to propose something bold or something different. So I think collaboration is one of them. And to the second point that you were saying, discovery, I will add innovation is when you innovate, when you actually do something different. So I think for me that's, and I think in between is where you have, as Karla says, the tool, and that's why I see it more. Yes, it is a tool, but it's also part of the process, where the process you have the tool and the human, us, to kind of make that interaction. But I mean, I think that to me is part of the creativity, and also the way that you can, make things in a different way, more optimized, more real time, more effective. And that, Karla was saying, you in a generative design model, you can create, zillions of options. Yes, sometimes that's really great, and sometimes that's very time consuming. So it really varies. In master planning, we have, for example, in our group, that we use a particular procedural modeling in order to have large scale master plans, right? And that is great because it's a very optimized, time efficient way of doing a very large scale master plan in very quick time. But at the same time, there are other factors and layers that need to loop in, that it's not the answer of the end solution. It's trying to work around ourselves with that, with other factors. Where is the social? Where do you put certain things in an area? The numbers don't make sense to what I'm looking at with the model, and so on and so forth. So I think, it's not a one streamline. It's a sort of a feedback loop all the time. And I think that is where the whole creativity it's embedded into. That's why I'm saying about collaboration, which is using the imagination, and at the same time that you're discovering new things. The discovery of knowledge is also the diffusion of knowledge, or that knowledge. And for me, that's to be innovative.
Yeah, and I think but thinking of AI as complement, because a lot of the articles that we're reading are saying it will replace, it will take over. But if you actively engage on how do you make it a complement,
yes, absolutely,
it will make a difference. Absolutely. So I think that's what my last comment on this question.
So it's super interesting, and I love that you both are concurring in the sense that, yes, you want AI to be, just complementing your task, that it's an iterative, complicated, multi-step process in which at some specific tasks, generative AI can improve the outcome. But I'm just wondering, because that's one, it sounds like the best case scenario, and I'm wondering if you have heard about cases where generative AI has been misused in the field of urban design and architecture, and what are some of the dangers if the technology is misused? Because in any technology, it always depends on how you use it, and I totally agree that there's a way of using it in a humane way that actually improves the outcome and is to our benefit. But do you know about also contrary examples, and what can we learn from them? Like, what do we maybe need some regulation to prevent these aspects or so?
I think, to me, it's I wouldn't know right now of any misuse, but what I do know is not necessarily about misusing a generative model. It's the information, the data, and how to use the data. And that, at least from a city planning perspective, sometimes is not used well enough, or in the best way to actually improve the lives of people. And it's just, you have the whole amount of data available, but you don't use it effectively, or you don't know how to use it, or you don't know what it informs, and it's just a vast amount of information. And sometimes it is well used. And I think one of the things that we wrote recently in the Urban AI Guide is putting very specific case examples on how data and AI is really implemented, and how that impacts truly into the built form and into people in a way. So I'm not sure. I cannot answer whether if it's been misused. For me, I've seen a lot of the lack of use or inefficiency of using the vast amount of data, and as they call it, the big data thing. So I think we need to improve that in that sense, and if that requires to do better models in that respect, then we should. But that would be my view.
Let me expand this. So, for example, I think AI can answer anything, which means that
so I do not.
lot of pressure.
I do not agree on that.
But so let me elaborate so it can answer everything. I'm not saying it's answering it right or wrong. It just gives you an answer. That's the thing. So whatever the question is, the answer is garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah.
So that puts a lot of pressure, not pressure, but responsibility. And I think this relates with authorship. Responsibility in how you ask the question meaningful. And then when you say misuse, I have, instead of misuse, I will say a warning that a lot of, and I did it as well. When you start working with AI and data, you try to generalize. You try to create a model that should be able to generalize for everyone, that part, that prediction, that classification, and so on. So for me, a warning that I give an advice to everyone is, let's not make generalized models. Let's make personalized models. And then let's say it up front, the things that are not included, the biases that it has, and all the things that are part of the model, so you can make this inference. So I will say, like, a warning is not try to generalize things for a greater community, try to personalize models that are giving you upfront the limitations of the model. I think this relates with the idea of authorship. The moment we are using all of these pre-trained large language models, or these pre-trained diffusion models that are taking a lot of data from users, from artists, and so on, the output is not of our authorship. I think it's a shared authorship, and we need to embrace that. The same thing creating personalized and disclosing, disclosing what made this model is the same thing as every single thing, every single output that we do through these algorithms, because this is a collaborative authorship, and it needs to have a face. Because the problem with AI is that when you say this is an output from DALL-E 2, it takes away a lot of the effort that has been done to create an algorithm and all the data and all the people that contributed to it for the training data. So I think this shared authorship and then disclosure, and how do you actually present what you're doing in a personalized or customized way, it's what I will encourage people to do through the use of AI.
In that, I completely agree. It has to be a personalized model, basically. It has to do, and I think that was my point on the, everybody alerts of the big data and how to use it. Is like, you can have vast amounts of information and, very generalized models, but if you don't focus it on something that is personalized, customized, then you're probably not solving anything, or not solving enough, let's say. So as you say, garbage in, garbage out, right? So yeah. It has to be customized, yes.
But these generalized, generic AI models are out there, and they're really commonly used right now, right? So I'm wondering, because exactly, this question of authorship is very central and relates to a lot of other topics. On the one hand, the topic of plagiarism, like if people, for example, artists are complaining partially, there's a letter from a lot of artists that say, okay, well, it's using my art images that I haven't given them the authority to use them. And then it's generating very similar styled paintings without any citation or reference back to the work. So they're not profiting from this actual recycling of the work. And so the question is, how much do you think this, for example, this misuse, as you said, Laura, like the lack of ability to interpret the output of the generative AI models, maybe, and how far do you think that relates to the lack of references, the lack of transparency of what the model is based on? And how do you deal with the fact that these generative, generic generative AI models are already out there and are really used a lot already in all kinds of sectors? And so do you have a response to that? Or are you just using your own generative AI models that you really develop yourself?
My answer is we do our own. Yeah, that's mostly the case. We have tried the generic ones. We learn from them, but usually we do our own. I mean, we know that there's out there, your sort of, well, I don't want to mention names of the companies. It's better not to. But there are two in particular out there. They're very, chum through, numerical and contextual data. They use the AI and machine learning algorithms to make it as a tool for city planners, for design, kind of arranging that complex urban designs things, and they it's interesting. We've used it, we've tested, and in the end of the day, we come to realize the conclusions that this is so generic that we can apply it in a very limited way, that it really doesn't end up helping that much to our process thinking or to our design input. So, which is why that's why I'm saying I agree with Karla in the sense that it has to be personalized. Now, this is just within our company wise, our work, but also out there, I mean, I think it should be the same standard. It should be about authorship as well. That's why I'm mentioning a lot of collaboration, because even though we do use our own models, it's also a process of collaboration and authorship there that is not just us, it's also with the stakeholders as well. And that makes it much more focused, that makes it much more customized to the needs of what a future piece of an urban environment might be, and the implications and the impacts that that's going to have. So yeah, I mean, it's always, I don't see, there's a danger, yes, to have those generic models, but again, it's the same with the data itself in a pure form. How do you use it? How do you learn from it in a more efficient way? There's nothing wrong to have those generic models. It's just really to have them, how you use them I think, is the real question, and for what? So, I think the use of information and the use of the model is to answer a specific question, or that you want to, you want to try to find answers or to solve a solution onto something that's specific, and hence the personalized model.
I want to bring this, a word that everyone is scared or want to talk about, so bias, right? So bias in data means that the output is biased. But I want to think of a positive bias in architecture and urban design, because bias creates personalized models. And if bias is disclosed and addressed, you're telling exactly what to expect from. So I think I will really like to think of a bias, a positive bias in design processes, when you're able to input what you're looking for, what your constraints are, the curation of the data that you have into the output that you're looking for. So I think this is exactly question, positive bias, and personalized is what I will say in architecture or in design in general, because not only in urban design, in architectural design or furniture design, tourism, all of this is a very personal output. Of course, it does a lot of science. We do have a lot of metrics that we need to comply, but it needs to be, we need to disclose how we're creating those models.
Wow, yeah, super interesting. So I think before we open to the Q&A session, I would like to ask a last question, because now both of you mentioned really that you develop your own AI models, and also avoiding like the wrong type of bias, not the positive bias, and understanding the model limitations, and exactly also identifying authorship means that you have to be able to analyze the machine learning models that you develop. So my question is, do architects and urban planners in the coming decades, do they have to be architects and machine learning engineers to find a job, or no, is it going to be sufficient to have the more like traditional education? And because it's quite complicated, right? To also, especially if you want to do a good job with developing these models, preparing the data correctly, interpreting it correctly, you have to be able to understand it correctly. So my question is, is that going to be the role of architectures? Is it going to be like of architects? Is it going to be a collaboration, or is it a collaboration with machine learning engineers where you're working right now? And what's the role of the architect? How do they spend their time in that process? Like.
Well, I think it's not only architects, that's for sure. There's not only urban designers, that's for sure. It has to be a collaboration of many different, disciplines and expertise, and it's interdisciplinary and it's multidisciplinary. So no, you don't have to be an architect. I don't think so. But if you want to be, that's fine. But the role of the architect or the designer within this process, we are in the world of design or the built environment, whichever front you pick it. It's about, it's about the cities, it's about the built environment. However you want to tackle it, or we tackle it, you need that sort of collaboration. So in the respect of the architect, is that nowadays, I think, is to be perhaps more familiar on how AI works really in between the process. That's why I'm insisting about the process. How does it work? What does it inform? What doesn't work in certain aspects or areas, and how you can use that in a better way. But it's never, for me, it's never in isolation. That's why I'm saying it has to have a collaboration at the heart of it. So yeah, I mean, I think, if anything, as a designers or as architects, we need to get up to speed to the AI and the sort of generative processes that a software engineer can do, but he doesn't have the mind of a designer. That an architect perhaps has the mind of a designer, but then he needs the software engineer. And I'm just putting a very blunt example, right? So it needs other, in the same way that if you're tackling a specific problem, like, I don't know, transport flows or ecology, green space, all of those, you need the expertise of those people in order to embed how do you answer a question about a green space environments, and how do you monitor that? Again, another example, right? So for me, it has to be very multidisciplinary.
I will say a statement, but don't quote me on that. I think in the future, there won't be a computer science career, because what we see now with these large language models is that coding, it's very easy because you just need to give instructions. And I mean, I'm a coder. I know how to code. I know how to do things. But for example, I think in the future, these learning to code, learning computational programming, or at least learning how a programming language works, will be embedded in the career itself.
Yeah.
So we won't need to have software engineers helping us, or
I think we will need it. I think we will need it.
But we will be able to address all of these computational requirements that particular careers have. I think so. As I said, this is controversial. So I think now at the moment, like today, we still need this specific knowledge, but in the future, probably this knowledge is already embedded in your, elementary schools. So what you're learning as mathematics there, it's going to be transformed into this coding, programming, computational language that when you came to a particular specialty, such as design, maybe this is already in your set of tools that you have to attack a problem.
Yeah.
And I think this, I mean, I don't know if you agree, but I think, I mean, my son is 8 years old, and I try with him this idea that how do you challenge him? How can he learn things in this way?
But I think that opens up even a bigger discussion, and maybe for a different conversation. But that's the whole big issue that they pose with the chat GPT into the schools. And if you're actually learning with chat GPT, and how does that reflect to the traditional way of learning for kids or for anything? And I think there needs to be a balancing act, I think. Because if it is embedded since you're, for your first initials when you are learning as a kid, or you don't leave actually the traditional because you have to learn certain things that a machine or AI cannot teach you. So I think there's a little bit of a balance there. I'm not saying that it won't exist. Probably it will be, but not to the extent like, oh my God, we won't need, let's say the software engineers, but actually we would need, and you will need the architect, and you will need the civil engineer, or the, whatever. But they will be embedded perhaps in their own sort of training, in their, in their sort of initial trainings. But I think, that's the whole conversation. I think that language models like the ChatGPT or the DALL-E or the Midjourney, whatever, it's starting to have implications from, educational aspects to it, and what are the pros and cons, the dangers of it, and the not, and the copyright and the authorships and all these kind of worlds that makes it even more complex. So what that, I just think there it will be embedded. I do agree with you, Karla, but at the same time, I think that there will have to be a balancing act, because you still will have to learn in the traditional way certain things that, the human brain needs to learn from. Yeah. Right. I think, but that's my.
It's a really large discussion.
I know. I don't want to get into that, but
super interesting about like how these tools should be integrated into wider society, etc. The governing and etc. It's a large discussion we can't cover right now. So of course we want to give like also the participants the chance to ask questions. So Hubert, what do you think? I see already a few questions in the chat. Should I just read them out, or and then we ask people afterwards if they have more questions? So like David Wurster asked, do you think it will be possible to include affectivity, emotions, social values to create livable places in generative AI models within urban planning? I think it was partially already answered, but maybe a short summary. maybe Karla.
For example, one work that we're doing at the lab is trying to include formal description of objects. So for example, we have this experiment of designing bridges. And how do you, I mean, if you're using parametric design, you're able to design the thickness of the elements, how big it should be, what's the loads of the forces that it can carry. But how do you design a bridge that is strong, that looks, I don't know, beautiful? How do you define beautiful in numbers? So you cannot, and only language is able to describe the things that are subjective, that are talking about not quantitative measures. So I will say language is a good way. And that's why we see all of these DALLs and so on, Midjourney, that language is able to encapsulate things that you cannot quantify. But in other layers, such as comfort, and I think you said ergonomic and livable places, I think these are too subjective and too specific, that should be layers that can be added through human interaction, not precisely through generative AI. So I think generative AI has a limitation, which will be into the formal quantitative aspects, but then after that, that's the design process. And I think that's why architects and designers and urban planners won't be replaced, because we still have relevance into these other layers that are much more complex than the ones that we're seeing.
Yeah, interesting. I think David had another question, a little bit different but related. Would you agree that generative AI has an impact on cognitive processes of urban planners to focus more on creativity instead of basic tasks?
Just to respond probably of those two questions of now that I'm reading to of David, I think for the first one, it is possible. I mean, just in the process, and that answers also the second question of cognitive processes. We do have, for example, some models in order to test the built environment in terms of the impact of the built environment into cognitive aspects of how we experience space, how we move through around space. And I think, you know, I wouldn't say that we're including aspects like affectivity, emotions, or, you know, but the social values into it. But some of the aspects that include is, for instance, matters of noise, stress, excitement, that sort of thing through generative models that we embed within CGI and virtual reality walkthroughs, and we have used that at least a little bit embedded into our process design, and that sort of has an impact on wayfinding processes and in wayfinding of how we are designing a space or a built environment or a new design of the city. So I think I'm just answering that question, probably not in terms of the AI itself, but also that certain models do have an impact on some cognitive processes that at least at the moment ourselves we're testing. It's still on under a test bed into our process of design, if that makes sense. So
great. Okay, moving on, maybe because we just have 10 minutes left, but so Jose Capio asked to you both, are you already using AI urban design tools at university courses with your students? And would you recommend some specific tools, hopefully cost-free, easy to start with?
Yeah, I started teaching a design studio in the architectural career here at UF, where we use search engine. So we are able, with the students, we get into a process of how to design with data. So we do this through through search engines. So for example, we collect data from social media. So each student will be able to collect around 10,000 posts from social media for a particular place, for a particular type of users, and then navigate what's the feeling. So that's doing the site analysis first. Then we do another exercise when we're working in the same way, instead of using a search engine for social media, but we're using search engine for 3D details. So we are able to, we have a data set of about 200,000 details of architectural joints. And we're able to, through the search engine, navigate the space and understand which joint we'll use for a particular project. We also have workshops to use generative AI, just first to understand what is generative, what's the generative process against, for example, a discriminative process such as classification. And then we use generative AI to conceptualize an idea. So how do you describe a project in conceptual terms instead of doing it through a very, like, instead of saying design a house, like what does the feeling of that house should feel like when you're designing? So there are like many ways of exploration, because I think now AI is very recent into design practices that we just need to explore, and we need to play with all of these tools. Yet, because we're not influencing, let's say, in academia, you're not directly influencing what is happening out there in companies. It's a very fresh way of trying out things. So yes, we do a lot of AI exploration in design process.
Great. So there's already 4 more questions. I'm not sure if we managed to address them all in 7 minutes, but starting with Nick Kaufman's question, what are your opinions on the ownership of these AI models and regulation, both within industries and within society at large? That's a really large question, so try and keep it a bit short if it's possible.
Well, I mean, my ideal future will be that these models are not centralized. So we're talking about a decentralization. Of course, this needs to be regulated through law, exactly what happened with the internet. So when the internet was created, there was a lot of involvement from policymakers that tried to address these as something for everyone, right? But with the limitations of how it can be used. So I think this is what I wish it will happen in the future. So decentralized AI models where we are able to create these personalized models that we were talking. But indeed, we need actively now to talk about the restrictions. So I think now lawyers and policymakers needs to be very involved into this process, because we need to plan for the future. And there are many ways that this can go wrong. So therefore, it is very important that we start talking about this right now.
Okay.
Laura,
Sorry.
Yes. Sorry, I was trying to find the question again because I couldn't hear it. But
like regulation and like, how do you think who should own it and how should it be regulated? AI models.
Well, that's going to be a long answer. But I just need to. I'm really sorry, but I really do need to dash. But just to respond, very, very quickly. I think, I mean, I agree with what Karla is suggesting, but I think I come from a standpoint that it's one thing is in academia that you have. There are certain ways to regulate those models, but I think what is in terms of how we do it within a particular practice which has a particular authorship, and then how we put those models forward, and how to regulate those models. And the other one is models that can be also tailored for city planners, the city itself. So I think it's just it's not an easy answer for me, but it's a tricky one. I think it really depends on how you regulate those models, for the specific people and stakeholders involved. That's what I'm trying to say, probably very badly. And just to answer to Jose, I teach in the ETH on the cognitive sciences, which is why I was trying to answer on the cognitive science aspect into it. And we also have a certain generative models to use in terms of a sort of wayfinding analysis related also to some syntax analysis that students are able to use. If that also helps, then I'm happy to send you more information on that if that is useful. Okay, but I'll leave it to that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Laura. I heard you have to leave soon, I guess. So I would maybe ask one last question to Karla, since we're running out of time. So I think one, sorry, now I'm losing the question, but there's one fairly abstract question, which is maybe interesting because you can take it to different places. As an architect and urban planner, how do we start by AI? So I think the question is like, how do you start a project using artificial intelligence? Do you have an example of what could be an interesting and meaningful way to do so?
Yeah, for now, I will say any question that relies on data, you should start thinking about how AI can be used. So for example, I give always this example to my students. When you're starting a design project, when you're at the early stages, you do this precedent analysis, which means that you're trying to figure it out exactly where you're moving. So I would say a good use for AI for that particular project will be to really use it as to reduce the space of possibilities. So through being able to, instead of only looking at 5 options, which was the case before, like with this mood board, for example. Now with AI, you're able to say, I have this data set of million already built good projects. Can you summarize which are the most relevant in terms of materials that I want to use, in terms of site that they are in place? Show me. And so this is a good way of using AI to reduce the space and try to understand where to move forward from them. For that particular stage in the design practice, which is at the beginning, to be inspired. Another way to start with AI, and I'm going to copy some links here. These are already AI models developed by my friends and colleagues from ETH Zürich. They created these search engines that I've been telling you about during this conversation, which is what generative AI is trying to do. So generative AI and search engines can be compared one-to-one. So generative AI, it is interpolating through a database. Search engines is just indexing from the database. So with generative AI, you're getting kind of a fake-ish interpolation of the data. With search engines, you're getting the index, the exact thing that you're looking for. So I say we can use both to be playful, but we can, I will say first thing to use will be to understand what a search engine is, and then try to ask meaningful questions in the design process. I'm going to copy the links here, and then as well, I'm going to copy the link to my lab. If you have more questions, my email is as well there, and I'm sure Uber will send, and I'm going to copy my email here on the chat as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that was a really, really interesting discussion that we had. And yeah, should I give a short summary, or you, Hubert, did you want to do that? Maybe you prepared something.
I want to go for the summary, then go, and I will just do the conclusion very quickly.
Okay. Yeah, so it's a really, really wide topic, and we did not cover everything. So there's a lot of wider questions around, again, the politics of it, and also like the societal impacts and how exactly it should be used. But I think we did give quite a lot of examples of how you can make it more humane, how you can integrate it into a wider, more complicated urban design process. And also, yeah, how it should be more personalized and therefore also more deliberately used for a specific purpose, with concrete analysis of the data being put in and the output being analyzed as well, more explicitly. So I think we learned a lot, and Karla and Laura provided a lot of useful insights and links. Thank you for that. And I think with that we conclude today's conversation. Hubert, you wanted to say something?
No, just a few words. Thanks a lot again, Karla, Tabea, Laura, for this really enlightening, fascinating, insightful conversation. It was really amazing. Thanks to all of you for participating, for all your questions. That was super interesting. So as Tabea just told, it's already the end of this Urban AI conversation. I put it in the chat our YouTube channel, because the recording of the session will be available in the coming days. A synthesis will also be available on our blog. That I also put the link on the chat. I also put the link of our newsletter, because we are going to publish a report on generative AI and cities. So obviously, if you are interested in those issues, in those questions, feel free to register. to our newsletter, and like this will be updated when the report will be published. Thanks again to all of you, and have an amazing week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.